Welcome to another episode of Practical Nutrition. I'm Alex.
I'm Cassie.
And I'm Sarah.
And today we are talking about understanding BMI. So if you've been to the doctor or talked to a healthcare professional, seen a dietitian, you've probably heard the term BMI at some point. Body mass index is what BMI stands for, and it's a value derived from your weight and height and is used as an indicator of body fat. So you've probably heard it at the doctor, somebody saying you have a low BMI, you have a high BMI, you're in normal range. So we're going to dive into it a lot deeper today. BMI is an inexpensive alternative compared to direct measures of body fat, such as things like underwater weighing, DEXA, 7-site skinfold, which is what we do here. So it's just a different way to assess your health. As mentioned, like I just said, it does not directly measure body fat. So sometimes people will say, well, it's a measure of your body fat, but it doesn't necessarily directly correlate to what your body fat is. However, it is sometimes discussed as a prominent evaluation of your health status. So sometimes if you do go to the doctor, they'll say your BMI is high, we've got to make changes. But again, we're going to look into that a little bit further today. Research shows that over 30% of Americans are considered overweight or obese. However, these results are typically based on BMI status. So, how can you accurately assess your health? Does BMI even matter? Let's start at the beginning. We're going to dive into the history of BMI, and Cassie's going to start there.
Yes, it's very interesting.
Yes.
So I learned some things when we were doing this podcast as well. So BMI was introduced in the early 19th century by a Belgian mathematician named Lambert Adolphe Jacques Quetelet. He introduced the concept of social averages. In developing the social average concept, his goal was to determine the characteristics of an average man and the distribution of various human characteristics around the average man. He produced the BMI formula to give a quick, easy way to measure the degree of obesity and the general population compared to the average man. BMI was created roughly 200 years ago, but wasn't used in medicine until 1980. So, and there's only one of us at the table that was born at that time.
I know people that are from 1980.
I was born in the 70s, so I was around at the time. So, in my lifetime, he mentioned that BMI should not be used to indicate the level of fat in an individual. Should not be used.
Yeah.
Interestingly.
Yeah.
It was more so created to assist the government in allocating resources of the general population. So the results of this formula suggest that there are distinct categories of underweight, ideal weight, overweight, and obesity with sharp boundaries that vary by decimal places. So the formula is BMI equals the weight in pounds divided by height in inches squared times 703, or BMI could be weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. So
that's kind of the history around it, and really what we're saying based off of that is that this person created it more so as a general guide of assessing the population rather than saying this is your body fat, this is where your health is at. So it wasn't even, I'm not going to even try to repronounce his name, his intention from this formula to be used in the way we use it today. So how is BMI used for adults?
Yeah, I think that's so interesting what happens when you do research about a certain thing, and the fact that he said it should not be used basically to indicate your fat levels is like, duh. Like,
we're using it all the time. Yeah.
So as mentioned, BMI does have those sharp boundaries to differentiate categories, and they do go to the decimal place. The result of the formula will result in a number that falls into a certain group, and we learned this in our education across the board. That's one thing that was nailed in our heads is these numbers to the decimal point. And so underweight, if you're classified as underweight by your BMI, that means you have a BMI below 18.5. And so if you are called normal weight, you have a BMI from 18.5 to 24.9. If you are overweight, your BMI is 25.0 to 29.9. And obese is 30.0 and above. And there's different classes of obesity too, depending on where your BMI falls over 30. So the usefulness of BMI, it's honestly probably kind of sketchy because some people use it, some people don't. Should it indicate how healthy I am? And we'll dive into the research and stuff of that too. But why would healthcare professionals use it, right? So let's talk about that. We kind of mentioned this, but it is inexpensive and it's an easy screening method to determine a weight category. All you you need is that person's weight and height, and that's it, nothing else. And you really don't even have to look at a person to know that. If you have those numbers, then there you can figure out what their BMI is. It can also indicate correlations with various metabolic diseases as a type of screening tool. So typically people with higher BMIs typically are associated with, having increased blood pressure and blood sugar, excess abdominal fat, dyslipidemia, all things that we don't want our clients to have. So additionally, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute calls BMI a useful measure of overweight and obesity, an estimate of body fat, and a good gauge for risk of diseases that can occur with increased body fat. And the Institute reports that the higher a person's BMI, the higher their risk of developing heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, breathing problems, and certain cancers can be. However, research across the board continues to show that BMI does have many, many limitations.
Right, and we're going to dive into those limitations here in just a little bit, but we're going to look at more research as well. So who relates BMI to these cases? So with a higher BMI, they found 21% of cases have heart disease, 21% have stroke, 58% of type 2 diabetics have a high BMI, 39% of those with hypertension have a high BMI. So there is a correlation found, and that's heavily researched and shown. So typically if you do have a higher BMI, typically obesity, then you are at higher risk for these types of metabolic diseases. The prospective studies collaboration, which included nearly 900,000 participants, found that mortality was lowest when BMI was about 22.5 to 25. At 30 to 35 BMI, median survival was reduced to 2 to 4 years, and at 40 to 45 BMI, it was reduced by 8 to 10 years, which is comparable to the effects of smoking. So
that's a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot. So being overweight can cause these types of things. Being obese can cause these types of things, but it's not a direct correlation. If you have a BMI that's higher, this is what's going to happen. But they did find these correlations. Also, measuring BMI and tracking it over time offers a simple way for people to tell whether they are at a generally healthy weight for height. So if you're somebody who has no idea where to start, this BMI could be a tool that, let me just assess where I'm at based on these categories to see if I need to make some changes. Obviously, if you see a healthcare professional or dietitian, we're going to do all kinds of other screenings, but if you have no idea where to start, that might be a good place to see kind of where you are at. The CDC states that calculating BMI is one of the best methods for assessing overweight and obesity in the population, since the calculation requires only height and weight. So again, it's inexpensive and it's easy. It allows people to compare their own weight status with that of the general population, which I already mentioned. And with BMI, a lot of people can use that. Everybody in the population can use it. So it covers a large population rather than it being expensive and a healthcare professional having to do it for you. And like I said, it's used worldwide, therefore it can be seen as a common interpretation or index that many understand. So across the board, healthcare professionals could send BMI back and forth, and we all know what it means, really, no matter what language you're in, what country you're in. So it's a universal thing that we could use. BMI may reflect improvement or promote motivation in various populations that weight reduction is necessary. So let's say you go to the doctor and you're in class 3 obesity, it might kind of jumpstart some motivation and I want to be at a lower BMI. It's not always the case, but sometimes we do use BMI to say, here's where we're at, here's kind of where we need to be if we don't have other tools to assess. So like we mentioned, BMI can be useful, but there are many limitations, and Kaz is going to go over that for us.
Yes, BMI has been used as a blanket definition of obesity and health, which was not its original intention, which we already discussed. Obesity boils down to excessive body fat, not always weight versus height as BMI promotes. So sometimes there are other things going on, which we'll talk more about. As some may think, BMI does not diagnose body fat and overall health of an individual. BMI only relates weight to your height, so it's only one number and one factor. It's not a body fat indicator. Factors such as lean muscle mass and ethnic origin can alter the relationship between BMI and body fat. It also doesn't provide any indication of the distribution of body fat and doesn't fully adjust for the effects of height, frame, or body shape or type. Bone is more dense than muscle, for example, and twice as dense as fat. So a person with strong bones, high amounts of lean mass, and low body fat could reflect as a higher BMI, occasionally classified as even overweight or obese. And in the athletic population, which we all work with, that can happen, and we see it all the time. So, and also, with those classifications, it can be a motivator, but I've also seen it be a way that people feel bad about themselves if they go into the doctor and maybe they do have a lot of lean mass and the doctor is telling them that they're obese and they're not.
Yeah. And if you're not watching this video, I have a very large frame, like a broad frame, and I'm tall, and my BMI is actually overweight. But like when you look at a lot of people, they may not be. They just maybe have a lot of lean mass or their frame is larger. So it's just something to think about for sure.
And we have people, I'm sure you guys have too. Even recently, I've had people that have asked me, my doctor told me my BMI is obese or overweight, and that I need to make and I'm looking at this person. I've done measurements on this person. I'm like, but you look healthy, that doesn't tell us the full story. And it can be a negative thing for people's mindset and drive restrictive eating over exercise, which we've talked about before in other podcasts. And we definitely don't want to see our clients go through that.
Yeah. And some of, I'm sure you guys can agree, some of our healthiest clients, doing all the right things, eating all the things, exercising, may be slightly overweight on the BMI scale, but they're doing a lot of the right things.
Yes. The labs are good.
Yeah. And it definitely makes a difference. And on the flip side, you can also have a healthy BMI and not be healthy.
Absolutely.
And so you have a really high body fat percent, or the way you distribute your body fat is not in a healthy place. And so it can also give people a false sense of healthiness.
That's so true.
Based on that.
Yeah, that is so true.
And there's differences between men and women too, in terms of how BMI is interpreted and whatever. And so generally speaking, at the same BMI, women tend to have more body fat than men. So hence, BMI doesn't tell you body fat. And at the same BMI, older people on average tend to have more body fat than younger adults. That just happens throughout the aging process, unfortunately. And at the same BMI, athletes tend to have less body fat than non-athletes. And like we said, you can determine BMI without looking at someone. And by looking at someone, seeing someone's frame, assessing their diet, there's so much more that goes into determining, okay, yes, you're at the weight that we think you should be at to perform well, to be healthy, all of those things. And so just to pull out some research, there's a study published in the International Journal of Obesity that found that in subjects with a BMI of 25, which is technically overweight, the percent of body fat in men varied between 14% to 35%. And in women, it varied between 26% and 43%. So this shows that body fat percent may vary greatly, even if BMI falls in the same category. And let me tell you, someone that's at 26% body fat versus 43% body fat looks so much different, and BMI just doesn't give you that picture. So just remember that when you hear someone tell you this is your BMI, it does not tell you the full story. And then on the flip side, those that reflect a normal BMI range may still be at a high risk for chronic diseases such as diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease based on fat distribution. So those who carry what's called an android shape, a lot of that's determined by our genetics. I am lucky enough to have an android shape. That means that most of my fat goes to my abdomen, but that puts me at higher risk for development of those metabolic diseases because all that fat is stored around my vital organs. And so we don't want that. But again, you can't tell that from BMI, and people who have a normal BMI range can be putting themselves at higher risk by carrying more of their fat stores there.
Right. And looking at more limitations. So for those working hard for weight loss, so if you're somebody who is at a starting point and you've worked really hard to lose body fat, but maybe you're gaining lean weight at the same time and you're improving where your fat is distributed and all that stuff, it's not really going to show sometimes on BMI. So your doctor may say you still need to decrease your BMI category, or some other healthcare professional might be telling you that, but you're like, I'm working really hard and I'm losing body fat, but I'm gaining muscle at the same time, and that's not necessarily going to be reflective on BMI. In a recent study, participants in a weight loss program barely saw any difference in BMI, but saw favorable changes in health in general. Up to 30% had no weight change, but they had increased lean mass and decreased body fat. So that's why we do other measurements. Like here we do 7-site skinfold because we assess your lean weight versus fat weight rather than saying, well, what's your BMI? Oh, it's the same. Well, we're not making changes. There's lots of different other indicators that can assess your health, which we're going to go into in just a second. So in order to determine if BMI is a true indicator of your health, a healthcare provider or a dietitian can make further assessments with other various tests and screenings. And there's a lot out there, which is great news. And Cassie's going to dive into that for us.
Yes, so viewing weight distribution and body shape is a big one. We always assess our clients just visually if they're, what type of body do they have, and everybody has different body types, and so they're, that's something that a lot of people don't realize because in our society, people are like, well, I want to look like her, and and sometimes that can be frustrating. And if you put everyone into that narrow range of you need this BMI, a certain BMI for one body type might be healthier than for another body type. So there's that. And in adults, measuring both BMI and waist circumference may be a better way to predict someone's weight-related risk. And we definitely look at waist circumference here as well. That's an independent risk factor for all sorts of chronic diseases. Measures to determine lean weight versus fat weight is also a really important way to assess health. Skinfold measurements, where a fold of skin is pinched to measure the subcutaneous fat, that's the fat right under the skin, is one way that we do here. And it's a 7-site skinfold, so it's 7 spots, and it's really easy to do, really quick and affordable for most people to do. And it's nice to see those changes, even though you're going to see that, it's small changes, but you're going to see it consistently. Bioelectrical impedance, which is, you can do that on a scale a lot of times, but it measures the opposition to a flow of electrical current through the body. And so that's really dependent. And a lot of these are on hydration status and some different things. So some of the more accurate ones are going to be BOD-POD or underwater weighing or DEXA scan. Those tend to be a little bit more expensive. They're not as available. You're not going to do that consistently throughout the year, multiple times typically. So, so those are just some things to think about. And then looking at habits as a whole is really important. So looking at the whole person, the whole lifestyle, doing a food recall, dietary intake assessment, looking at fruits and veggie intake, lean proteins, whole grains, and healthy fat, looking at water intake and hydration status. Definitely we recommend half of your body weight in ounces every day to stay well hydrated. Looking at sleep and stress assessment, that's important for overall health. And then activity assessment as well, 150 minutes per week. We've talked about this before, but just reminding you guys, so 30 minutes, 5 days a week, and 2 days of strength training is also recommended. Also looking at blood work and regular checkups, getting your cholesterol, blood glucose, blood pressure, liver enzymes, all of those labs. We look at all those labs when we're assessing people's health and see if there's anything we can do or need to do for those. And then regular screenings for cancer, mood and behavior screenings, etc. And that's something that currently, a lot of people are having even more issues with, depression and that kind of thing. So making sure your mental health is being looked at as well. And limitations do exist in that some of those tests are more expensive, like I mentioned, and are difficult to perform on large populations. So BMI may be better for some types of populations, but they are more accurate and they are accessible for most people to do at least some of those.
Absolutely. So that boils down to, what's the answer? Do we use BMI or do we leave it in the past? What do we think?
Leave it in the past.
Leave it in the past. If we had a different formula that could be more accurate, that we could use across the board, then great. But right now, BMI is what is most used throughout the world. So that's kind of what we have for larger populations. So BMI can be used as a general, inexpensive, and quick tool to determine what category you fall in for weight. I say category. For weight versus height based on general population with other screening and assessments of your health. So BMI is not the end-all be-all. If you are in overweight, if you're in obese, there can be changes made. There can be other screenings and assessments made to determine where your health is at. It's not just that number does not define you. There's lots of different factors that go into into a BMI. Research shows that a higher BMI can be associated with correlations of various chronic diseases, and this is well researched. So I know we all kind of agreed to leave BMI in the past, but a higher BMI, especially obese, does show correlations with metabolic diseases and a higher chance of having some of those things. However, healthcare professionals like ourselves are trained to look at health as a whole picture, not just a BMI category. So this includes the things we already mentioned, body fat percent versus your lean weight, your frame, your diet, all those types of things, family history, exercise, sleep, stress, all those things play a huge role into defining your health. It's not just a number putting you in a category. A normal BMI range is not the golden ticket to health. However, it can show as an inexpensive indicator to make changes, but important to look at the whole picture, like I already mentioned. So, talk to your physician, your healthcare professional, a dietitian to determine what changes you need to make to improve your overall health instead of just defining yourself as a BMI category.
You're more than a category.
You're more than a category.
Yes, you are. And if it was used as a tool, I guess thinking about if it was used, because if you go in to see your doctor, for example, and they just are looking for a really quick way, they're not going to do a 7-site skinfold test, et cetera, et cetera. So if it was just a screening tool that said, hey, maybe you need to go talk to someone and make sure that everything is looking good with your overall health, I think that we would all probably agree that would be a good thing. But oftentimes, and I'm not saying 100% of the time, but oftentimes it's used as you're overweight, you need to go on a diet kind of, that kind of talk. And that may or may not necessarily be true. And you may, again, miss people that maybe have a normal BMI that need to also think about their nutrition and exercise, that kind of thing. So, I would say there are some pluses if it was used correctly, but we don't often see that. So,
right.
At least in our experience,
yeah,
people are either discouraged by it, or or it's not really going to change people's behaviors from what we've seen. So,
and when you slap a label on someone, they start to identify with that label, and if they're being called overweight or obese, that doesn't mean that you're unhealthy or you're not working towards your goals and things like that. So you have to be careful, and that's what we understand with our clients too. Is we don't want to slap any label on you.
Yeah.
We want to help you reach the goal. We want to help you reach the goal that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah,
so.
And I also had one client that their insurance company, because she has been training for marathons and lifting weights and doing and eating well, and and so she wasn't eating as well before, and so her lean mass has really increased and her BMI went up, and they were trying to charge her more based on that BMI number. So there's also some of that going on, which and so yet her lean mass had gone up and her body fat had gone down, and so it was just it's kind of interesting to see.
They should have a bod pod there.
So there can be some negatives if you're just looking at that number. So
yeah, absolutely. So lots of things to take away from this. Take BMI with a grain of salt. Can be helpful, yet there's lots of other factors to consider. And if you feel like you're stuck and maybe somebody put a label on you, come see us. We can do a 7-site skinfold and do other types of screenings and see kind of where you're at with your health. So this was another episode of Practical Nutrition. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.